The Chicago Symphony Center falls silent. Congressman Richard Vanderbilt freezes mid-laugh, his mocking grin dissolving as the first notes fill the concert hall. 30 seconds earlier, he had been ridiculing the homeless black girl sitting at the Steinway grand piano on the plaza outside. Someone should remove that street urchin before she damages an instrument, worth more than she'll ever see in her lifetime. He'd announced loudly to his wealthy companions, 14-year-old Aaliyah Montgomery, in worn sneakers and a jacket 2 sizes too big, had simply looked up at him with quiet dignity before turning to the keys. Now, as Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 pours from her fingers with breathtaking precision, the crowd gathering on the plaza grows silent. Pedestrians stop mid-stride. Musicians from inside the hall rush out to witness the impossible. Maestro Giovanni Rossi, the symphony's conductor, stands transfixed. His trained ear recognizes something beyond technical skill. This is artistry, soul, and years of disciplined practice emerging from the most unlikely source. Vanderbilt's face drains of color as he realizes hundreds of people with smartphones are recording not just the performance, but his cruel words moments before. The homeless girl he dismissed as worthless is playing like a master. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 48 hours earlier, Aaliyah Montgomery had awakened on a cot at Hope Haven Shelter on Chicago's South Side, the same place she had slept for the past 8 months since losing her grandmother and their apartment. At 14, she navigated homelessness with a careful routine designed to maintain dignity and pursue the one thing that gave her life meaning: music. Sister Evelyn Brooks, the shelter director, had been watching over Aaliyah since the day she arrived, a frightened 13-year-old whose grandmother had just died from complications of untreated diabetes. Unlike many homeless youth who arrived angry or traumatized into silence, Aaliyah carried herself with unusual grace, as though she was enduring temporary hardship rather than accepting a permanent fate. "That child has something special in her," Sister Evelyn told her staff. "I don't know what it is yet, but I see it in her eyes. She's not defeated." What Sister Evelyn didn't know was that Aaliyah's secret refuge was music, specifically classical piano performance that she had studied since age 4 under her grandmother's patient instruction. Aaliyah's grandmother, Margaret Montgomery, had been a concert pianist herself before arthritis ended her performing career. She had poured all her thwarted dreams into teaching her granddaughter, creating a prodigy whose talent far exceeded what their modest circumstances suggested possible. For 10 years, Aaliyah had practiced daily on an old upright piano her grandmother had somehow maintained, despite their poverty. Margaret had used her limited connections to secure occasional lessons from retired musicians who recognized Aaliyah's extraordinary gift and taught her for free or reduced rates. "You have a gift from God," Margaret had told Aaliyah during their final conversation before the stroke that killed her. "Don't let circumstances steal your music. Promise me you'll keep playing no matter what happens." That promise had sustained Aaliyah through the nightmare that followed: foster care placement that didn't work out, running away to avoid separation from her grandmother's memory, and eventually landing at Hope Haven Shelter, where at least Sister Evelyn's kindness provided some stability. But homelessness made practicing piano nearly impossible. The shelter had no instruments, and Aaliyah's days were consumed with basic survival: finding food, staying safe, attending the overcrowded public school, where teachers barely noticed one more struggling student among hundreds. Her salvation came through an unlikely friendship with Jerome J.J. Jackson, a 61-year-old homeless veteran who had once taught music at an elementary school before PTSD and alcoholism destroyed his career. J.J. had noticed Aaliyah's fingers moving in piano patterns while she waited in the shelter's dinner line, recognizing the unconscious practice of a trained musician. "You play?" he had asked, simply. The question had opened a connection between two musicians trapped in circumstances that seemed designed to silence their art. JJ told her about Cooper's music store, 3 miles away, where the owner, Mrs. Lynn Cooper, allowed serious students to practice on the floor models if they were respectful and came during slow business hours. "Tell her JJ sent you," he had instructed. "She'll let you play if you're real." For the past 6 months, Aaliyah had walked those 3 miles every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, the only times Mrs. Cooper could accommodate her. 2 hours of practice each week on a decent piano. It wasn't nearly enough to maintain her skill level, but it was enough to keep her promise to her grandmother. Mrs. Cooper had been skeptical at first. A homeless 14-year-old asking to practice classical piano seemed like a story too unusual to be true. But the first time Aaliyah sat down and played Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, with technical precision and emotional depth that brought tears to Cooper's eyes, the store owner understood she was witnessing something rare. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Cooper had asked, amazed. "My grandmother taught me," Aaliyah replied simply, as though 10 years of intensive classical training from a former concert pianist was a normal childhood experience. Cooper began allowing her extended practice time and occasionally forgetting to lock up music books that Aaliyah could study. The store owner never mentioned it, but she had started researching scholarship programs and youth music competitions, convinced that this homeless girl deserved opportunities that matched her talent. At school, Aaliyah kept her musical abilities secret. Being homeless already made her a target for bullying. Being a classical piano prodigy would only increase her isolation. She wore the same rotation of 3 outfits from the shelter clothing bank, kept her head down, and focused on maintaining passing grades with minimal attention. Her only friend was Marcus Reed, another homeless 15-year-old who protected her from the more dangerous elements of street life. Marcus didn't understand classical music, but he understood loyalty and recognized that Aaliyah needed someone watching her back. "You're different from the rest of us," Marcus had told her once. "You're not going to be homeless forever." "I can tell." Aaliyah wasn't sure she believed him, but she appreciated his faith. The promise she had made to her grandmother kept her going, but the daily reality of homelessness was grinding her down in ways she tried not to acknowledge. That Tuesday morning, as she prepared for school and another day of invisibility, she had no idea that her routine practice session would intersect with a moment that would change everything, a chance encounter with a millionaire whose cruelty would inadvertently expose her extraordinary talent to the world. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Thursday afternoon found Aaliyah walking her usual route to Cooper's music store. Her worn backpack, containing the music theory book Mrs. Cooper had accidentally left out for her to study. The October wind off Lake Michigan cut through her thin jacket, but she barely noticed. Her mind already on the Rachmaninoff Concerto she had been working on for 3 weeks. The walk took her past the Chicago Symphony Center, where she sometimes paused to listen to sounds drifting from the building during rehearsals. Today, however, something different caught her attention. A beautiful Steinway grand piano sitting on the plaza outside the hall, surrounded by ropes and a sign announcing Community Piano Project Music for Everyone. The installation was part of a city arts initiative, placing high-quality pianos in public spaces for anyone to play. Aaliyah had read about the program, but never imagined encountering one of the instruments in person. The Steinway gleamed in the afternoon sun, its polished black surface reflecting the surrounding buildings. She approached slowly, drawn by the instrument like a moth to flame. Her fingers ached to touch those keys, to feel the response of a concert-quality piano instead of the worn upright at Cooper's store. A small crowd of tourists and office workers milled about the plaza, some pausing to take photos of the piano, others hurrying past on their way to meetings. Aaliyah checked her watch. She was early for her practice time at Cooper's, 15 minutes to spare. Her heart pounded as she looked at the piano, at the sign inviting anyone to play. Surely that anyone included her, even if she didn't look like she belonged. She was about to sit down when a loud voice stopped her. "Excuse me, young lady, but I don't think that piano is meant for you." Aaliyah turned to see a well-dressed man in his 50s, expensive suit immaculate, silver hair perfectly styled, approaching with an expression of obvious disapproval. Behind him, a small group of equally wealthy-looking people paused their conversation to observe. "The sign says anyone can play," Aaliyah replied quietly, pointing to the posted rules. Congressman Richard Vanderbilt looked at the homeless teenager with barely concealed disgust. He had been walking to a fundraising lunch with potential donors when he spotted what he considered an eyesore, threatening to diminish the neighborhood's aesthetic. "That instrument is worth more than $150,000, Vanderbilt said condescendingly. "It's here for serious musicians and tourists who appreciate culture, not for street people to damage. Why don't you move along?" His companions chuckled at the dismissal, and several pulled out phones to photograph what they apparently found amusing. A homeless girl being put in her place by someone who understood proper social order. Aaliyah felt heat rising in her face, a mixture of humiliation and anger that threatened to overwhelm her carefully maintained composure. She had endured countless indignities since becoming homeless, but this casual cruelty from someone who clearly had never known hardship struck particularly deep. "I know how to play," she said, her voice steady despite the emotions churning inside. "I'm a trained pianist." This claim provoked open laughter from Vanderbilt and his group. The idea that a homeless 14-year-old in donated clothes could be a trained pianist seemed absurd on its face. "Oh, I'm sure you are," Vanderbilt mocked. "And I suppose you'll be performing at Carnegie Hall next week. Someone should remove this street urchin before she damages an instrument worth more than she'll ever see in her lifetime." A small crowd was gathering now, drawn by the confrontation. Some looked uncomfortable with Vanderbilt's obvious cruelty. Others seemed entertained by the spectacle. Jordan Ellis, a 24-year-old content creator who filmed street performances for social media, started recording, sensing that something interesting was developing inside the Symphony Center. Maestro Giovanni Rossi was walking through the lobby when he heard the commotion outside. At 67, the Italian conductor had spent his life in the world of classical music and had developed strong opinions about elitism and accessibility. He paused near the windows to observe the scene unfolding on the plaza. Aaliyah looked at Vanderbilt, at his mocking smile and the phones recording her humiliation, and made a decision. She could walk away, accept the dismissal and continue to her practice time at Cooper's store. Or she could keep the promise she had made to her grandmother, never let circumstances steal her music. Without another word, she walked to the piano bench and sat down. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed them over the keys, feeling the familiar configuration, the perfect spacing that only concert grand pianos provided. "This should be entertaining," Vanderbilt said loudly to his companions. "Let's see if the street performer can manage chopsticks." More laughter. More phones recording. Aaliyah closed her eyes and thought of her grandmother, of the thousands of hours of practice, of the promise that had sustained her through 8 months of homelessness. Then she began to play. The first notes of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 silenced Vanderbilt's mocking laughter as efficiently as if someone had thrown a switch. The complex, emotionally charged opening passage poured from the Steinway with a technical precision and interpretive maturity that seemed impossible from the homeless teenager sitting at the keys. Aaliyah's hands moved across the keyboard with the fluid confidence of someone who had played this piece hundreds of times, her fingers navigating the difficult passages with an ease that only came from years of serious training. The music filled the plaza, drawing pedestrians like a magnetic force. Vanderbilt's confident smirk faltered as he realized that the street urchin he had just humiliated was playing at a professional level. His companions stopped laughing, their phones still recording, but now capturing something very different from the entertainment they had anticipated. Inside the Symphony Center, Maestro Rossi froze mid-step. His trained ear immediately recognized not just technical competence, but genuine artistry. He rushed toward the entrance, his heart racing with a combination of excitement and disbelief. Jordan Ellis adjusted his camera angle, understanding that he was documenting something extraordinary. The contrast between Aaliyah's appearance and her obvious mastery created a powerful visual narrative that his followers would find compelling. Sister Evelyn Brooks, who happened to be walking past the Symphony Center on her way to a meeting with city officials about homeless services, heard the music and stopped. She recognized Aaliyah immediately and felt a mixture of pride and fear. Pride at witnessing the girl's talent, fear about what exposure might mean for her safety and stability. Marcus Reed, Aaliyah's homeless friend, who had been following at a distance to ensure her safety during her walk to Cooper's, emerged from the shadows and positioned himself near the plaza's edge. He didn't understand the music, but he understood crowd dynamics and potential threats. As Aaliyah continued playing, the crowd swelled. Office workers on lunch breaks stopped mid-stride. Tourists abandoned their sightseeing to witness the unexpected performance. Musicians from the Symphony Center emerged to see who was creating such beautiful sound. Professor Diane Chambers, a Juilliard instructor who was in Chicago for a conference, pushed through the growing crowd to get closer to the piano. Her expert assessment confirmed what her ears had already told her. This was conservatory-level performance from someone who should be studying at the world's finest institutions. Not living on the streets, Vanderbilt, realizing that his cruelty was being documented by dozens of phones and that the narrative was shifting dramatically against him, attempted damage control. "Well, clearly she has some training," he said loudly, trying to sound magnanimous. "Though proper musicians perform in concert halls, not on street corners." This comment drew angry murmurs from the crowd. Several people began verbally confronting Vanderbilt, pointing out his earlier mockery and the obvious contrast between his dismissive attitude and Aaliyah's extraordinary talent. "You should be ashamed of yourself," one woman called out. "This child has more talent in her little finger than you have in your entire privileged life." Vanderbilt's wife Penelope, who had been part of his group, looked at her husband with an expression combining disappointment and resignation. As a patron of the arts who served on several symphony boards, she understood exactly what they were witnessing and was horrified by her husband's behavior. "Richard, we need to leave." "Now," she said quietly, tugging at his sleeve, but Vanderbilt's ego wouldn't allow retreat. "I was simply pointing out that expensive instruments require protection from inappropriate use. This piano is city property that taxpayers funded. The program explicitly invites anyone to play," someone in the crowd shouted. "The only inappropriate thing here is your behavior." Social media was already exploding with live streams and videos of the performance. The hashtag, #YourStreetPianist, began trending as viewers shared the footage, accompanied by outrage at Vanderbilt's documented cruelty and amazement at Aaliyah's talent. As Aaliyah reached the concerto's climactic passage, her playing became even more emotional and powerful. The music carried the weight of her grandmother's legacy, the pain of her current circumstances, and the hope that music could somehow transcend the barriers poverty had created. Maestro Rossi emerged from the Symphony Center doors, tears streaming down his weathered face. In 50 years of conducting the world's finest orchestras, he had rarely encountered such a profound combination of technical mastery and emotional authenticity. The confrontation that had begun with mockery and cruelty was transforming into something far more significant. A public reckoning about talent, opportunity, and the ways society judges worth based on appearances rather than substance. While Aaliyah played to the growing crowd on the Symphony Center Plaza, Her performance was being watched in real time by people whose professional lives revolved around identifying and nurturing exceptional musical talent. Concert pianist. André Baptiste was in his Chicago hotel room, preparing for that evening's performance, when his phone erupted with notifications from colleagues sending him the live stream. At 38, Baptiste had performed in the world's most prestigious concert halls and had developed an infallible ear for genuine artistry versus mere technical proficiency. "Mon Dieu," he whispered, watching the homeless teenager navigate Rachmaninoff's most challenging passages with interpretive choices that revealed deep understanding of the composer's intentions. Where did this child learn to play like this? Baptiste immediately called his agent, Cassandra York, whose job included identifying promising talent for representation and development. "Cassandra, drop everything and watch the Chicago street piano video that's trending. Then find out everything you can about that girl." York, accustomed to Baptiste's occasional enthusiasms, was skeptical until she viewed the footage herself. 20 years in the classical music business had made her cynical about so-called prodigies, but what she witnessed transcended hype. This was conservatory-level performance from someone who appeared to be homeless and without resources. "André, if this is real, if she's actually trained to this level while living on the streets, this is the most remarkable story I've encountered in my career," York said. Already beginning research, entertainment agent Cassandra York's investigation quickly uncovered the broader context. Within an hour, she had identified Aaliyah through social media cross-referencing, located Hope Haven Shelter through contacts at Chicago's Department of Family Services, and discovered Mrs. Lynn Cooper's music store, where Aaliyah practiced twice weekly. Mrs. Cooper, contacted by York's assistant, was initially protective of Aaliyah's privacy, but ultimately shared information about the girl's extraordinary dedication and talent. "That child walks 6 miles round trip twice a week just to practice on my floor model piano for 2 hours. She's the most committed musician I've ever encountered." The revelation about Aaliyah's limited practice schedule only deepened York's amazement. Maintaining such technical proficiency with only 4 hours of weekly practice suggested either extraordinary natural talent or years of intensive early training, probably both. Meanwhile, philanthropist Benjamin Ashworth was having lunch with his foundation's education director when his assistant interrupted with the trending video. Ashworth had made his fortune in technology and now devoted his wealth to funding music education programs for underserved communities. "This is exactly why our programs matter," Ashworth told his director while watching Aaliyah's performance. "Talent exists everywhere, but opportunity is distributed unequally. How many other young musicians are we losing to poverty and neglect?" Ashworth's foundation immediately began researching how they could assist Aaliyah while respecting her dignity and agency. Their preliminary investigation revealed a familiar pattern: a talented child from a poor family whose circumstances had deteriorated. After losing the one adult who had nurtured her, GIFT documentary producer Keith Lawson, who specialized in films about extraordinary individuals overcoming obstacles, happened to be in Chicago filming a series about urban poverty. His production assistant burst into their afternoon planning meeting with news about the viral piano performance. "Keith, this is the story you've been looking for," the assistant insisted. "Real talent emerging from real hardship, captured in real time, with a clear villain in the millionaire who mocked her." Lawson watched the video with growing excitement, recognizing the narrative power of Aaliyah's story. But he also understood the ethical complexities of documenting a homeless miner's life and was determined to approach any potential filming with respect for her vulnerability. Back at Hope Haven Shelter, Sister Evelyn Brooks was fielding phone calls from media outlets, talent agents and well-meaning strangers, all wanting information about Aaliyah. The shelter director was simultaneously thrilled by the opportunity this exposure might create, and terrified about how it might disrupt the girl's fragile stability. "Lord, please let this attention help her rather than hurt her," Sister Evelyn prayed. Watching the view counts on the various videos climb into the millions, the convergence of professional musicians, philanthropists, media producers, and public attention was creating opportunities Aaliyah couldn't have imagined. But it was also creating pressures and expectations that could overwhelm a 14-year-old who was still struggling with basic survival. As Aaliyah's performance concluded with the final haunting notes of Rachmaninoff's Concerto, the plaza erupted in applause. The crowd had swelled to over 200 people, many with tears streaming down their faces, moved by the combination of technical mastery and emotional authenticity they had just witnessed. Maestro Giovanni Rossi pushed through the crowd, his professional dignity forgotten in his urgency to reach the young pianist. At 67, he had conducted performances by the world's finest musicians, but rarely had he witnessed artistry that moved him to tears. "Signorina," he said, approaching Aaliyah as she stood from the piano bench, "that was extraordinary. Where did you study? Who is your teacher?" Aaliyah, overwhelmed by the attention and still processing what had just happened, struggled to respond. "My grandmother taught me. She was a concert pianist, but she died 8 months ago." The maestro's expression shifted from excitement to compassion as he registered the full context: the worn clothes, the absence of adult supervision, the implication behind her simple statement. "Where do you live now, child? Who is caring for you?" Before Aaliyah could answer, Sister Evelyn Brooks arrived at her side, placing a protective arm around the teenager's shoulders. "She lives at Hope Haven Shelter. I'm Sister Evelyn, the director. And I think Aaliyah needs some space right now." Professor Diane Chambers, who had been observing from the edge of the crowd, stepped forward and introduced herself. "Maestro Rossi, Sister Evelyn, my name is Diane Chambers. I teach at Juilliard. I would very much like to discuss possibilities for this young woman's musical education." Marcus Reed, Aaliyah's homeless friend, positioned himself between her and the growing press of people, his protective instincts on high alert. The crowd meant well, but he understood how quickly good intentions could become overwhelming or even dangerous for vulnerable youth. Jordan Ellis, still filming, captured the convergence of these powerful figures around Aaliyah: the renowned conductor, the Juilliard professor, the shelter director, and the protective teenage friend. The narrative was writing itself, and his viewers were responding with unprecedented engagement. Concert pianist André Baptiste arrived at the plaza within 20 minutes, having left his hotel immediately after watching the performance online. His presence drew additional attention from classical music enthusiasts in the crowd who recognized the international celebrity. "Aaliyah," Baptiste said, introducing himself with gentle formality, "I'm André Baptiste. I would be honored if you would allow me to work with you, to help you develop your obvious gifts." The convergence of musical talent, philanthropic resources, and media attention was creating opportunities, but also potential complications. Vanderbilt, realizing the depth of his public relations disaster, had retreated with his wife to a nearby building, where Penelope was reading him the social media response to his documented cruelty. "Richard, you've humiliated yourself and embarrassed our family," Penelope said, her voice tight with controlled fury. "That girl has more talent and character than anyone in your political circle, and you treated her like garbage on camera." Vanderbilt's phone was exploding with calls from his political advisors, all delivering the same message. The video was going viral. His mockery was generating massive negative attention, and he needed to do damage control immediately, or his political career would suffer serious consequences. Meanwhile, philanthropist Benjamin Ashworth had arrived at the plaza with his foundation's education director, prepared to offer comprehensive support for Aaliyah's musical education. But he was experienced enough to know that simply throwing money at a situation could create as many problems as it solved. "We need to move carefully here," Ashworth told his director. "This young woman has been through trauma. She needs support that's thoughtful and sustainable, not just a media-friendly gesture that disappears when the cameras do." Sister Evelyn gathered Aaliyah, Marcus Maestro Rossi, Professor Chambers, Batiste, and Ashworth in a quiet area away from the crowd and cameras. The convergence of these powerful advocates created an unprecedented opportunity, but success would require coordination and respect for Aaliyah's agency and dignity. "Aaliyah has extraordinary talent that deserves world-class training," Sister Evelyn began. "But she's also a 14-year-old girl who's been homeless for 8 months. Any support needs to address both her musical development and her basic needs for safety. Stability and emotional healing, the strategic response that emerged from that conversation would transform not only Aaliyah's immediate circumstances, but would create a model for how the classical music world could identify and nurture talent regardless of socioeconomic background. The meeting in the Symphony Center's private conference room, hastily arranged by Maestro Rossi, brought together the convergence of power and resources that would transform Aaliyah's life. But first came the revelation that would shift how everyone present understood her journey and potential. Professor Diane Chambers had brought her laptop and pulled up performance videos of legendary pianists interpreting the same Rachmaninoff concerto Aaliyah had just played. Side by side with Jordan Ellis's footage of Aaliyah's Plaza performance, the comparison was startling. "Look at her interpretive choices here." Chambers pointed to a particular passage. "She's making decisions that usually come from years of studying multiple performances and understanding the historical context. This isn't just mimicry, this is deep comprehension of the music." Maestro Rossi nodded vigorously. "Exactly what struck me. She plays not just with technical skill, but with understanding of the composer's emotional intention. This is what separates competent musicians from true artists." Aaliyah sat quietly, surrounded by these accomplished professionals dissecting her performance, feeling simultaneously proud and self-conscious. Marcus stood near the door, clearly uncomfortable in such formal surroundings, but unwilling to leave his friend unprotected. André Baptiste asked the question everyone was thinking. "Aaliyah, how did you maintain this level of skill with only twice-weekly practice on a store piano? Most conservatory students practice 4 to 6 hours daily and still don't achieve what you demonstrated today." Aaliyah's response revealed the dedication that had sustained her through 8 months of homelessness. "I practice in my head every day. On the bus, in the shelter, during school when I should be paying attention to other classes. I visualize the pieces, work through the fingering, hear the music in my mind. When I get to Mrs. Cooper's piano, I already know what I need to work on." The revelation of her mental practice regimen stunned even the experienced musicians in the room. Mental practice was an advanced technique used by professional performers, not something typically mastered by teenage students. "Who taught you mental practice methods?" Chambers asked, her professional interest piqued. "My grandmother. She said when she developed arthritis and couldn't play anymore, she maintained her musical understanding through mental practice. She taught me it was a tool for when I couldn't access a piano." Sister Evelyn wiped tears from her eyes, finally understanding the full depth of what Aaliyah had been protecting all these months at the shelter. The quiet girl who never caused trouble had been carrying an entire world of musical knowledge and practice. Hidden behind the daily struggle for survival, Benjamin Ashworth cleared his throat, preparing to make the offer his foundation had developed during the past hour of rapid planning. "Aaliyah, with your permission and Sister Evelyn's partnership, I would like to propose comprehensive support for your musical education and personal stability." He outlined a plan that addressed both immediate needs and long-term development. Immediate placement in a stable housing situation with a carefully vetted foster family who understood her musical commitment. Full scholarship to attend the Chicago Academy of Music's pre-conservatory program. access to private instruction from Professor Chambers, and periodic mentorship from André Baptiste. And importantly, ongoing support from Sister Evelyn to ensure emotional continuity during the transition. This isn't charity, Ashworth emphasized. This is investment in documented extraordinary talent. You've already proven your dedication and ability. We're simply removing the obstacles that poverty has placed in your path. Aaliyah looked at Sister Evelyn, seeking guidance from the one adult who had been consistently present during her homeless months. The shelter director squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Baby girl, this is your decision. But I think your grandmother would want you to accept help that honors your gift, rather than letting pride keep you struggling." Before Aaliyah could respond, the conference room door opened to reveal an unexpected visitor. Congressman Richard Vanderbilt, accompanied by his wife Penelope, entered with an expression of forced humility that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I owe you an apology," Vanderbilt began, his political training evident in his carefully modulated tone. "I made assumptions based on appearance, rather than recognizing your obvious talent. It was wrong, and I'm sorry." The apology, while technically appropriate, felt hollow to everyone present. It was clearly motivated by damage control, rather than genuine remorse, an attempt to manage the public relations disaster his mockery had created. Maestro Rossi stood, his Italian temperament flaring. "You humiliated a child whose talent exceeds most professional musicians, and now you offer political apologies. Your cruelty was documented and shared with millions. Your words cannot be unsaid." Penelope Vanderbilt stepped forward, her genuine distress evident. "Aaliyah, my husband's behavior was inexcusable. As someone who has supported classical music programs for decades, I'm ashamed by his treatment of you. I would like to personally fund your education, independent of the foundation's support. As a small gesture toward making amends, the offer was substantial and seemingly sincere, but Sister Evelyn and Ashworth exchanged concerned glances. Aaliyah's situation was attracting attention and resources, but she needed protection from those whose motivations might be less pure than they appeared. The power dynamic had shifted completely from the plaza confrontation just hours earlier. The homeless girl who had been mocked was now surrounded by powerful advocates competing to support her development. But Aaliyah herself remained the calm center of the storm, her focus not on the attention or opportunities, but on the simple question of whether she could keep the promise she had made to her grandmother. Within 72 hours of Aaliyah's viral performance, the consequences rippled through multiple institutions and communities, exposing systematic failures while creating unprecedented opportunities for change. Congressman Richard Vanderbilt faced immediate political fallout as the video of his mockery accumulated over 15 million views across social media platforms. His opponent in the upcoming election created an advertisement featuring his cruel words alongside Aaliyah's beautiful performance. With the tagline, "This is how Richard Vanderbilt treats talented young people who need support." Political analysts calculated that the incident had shifted polling by 8 percentage points, transforming what had been a comfortable lead into a competitive race. Vanderbilt's attempts at damage control, the public apology, the offer of his wife's financial support, his sudden advocacy for youth arts programs were widely perceived as insincere political maneuvering. You can't insult a homeless child on camera and then expect people to believe you care about helping youth when it becomes politically necessary, one editorial observed. The Chicago public school system faced scrutiny when investigators discovered that Aaliyah had been attending Lincoln Park High School for 8 months without any teacher or counselor. Recognizing her exceptional musical talent or addressing her obvious homelessness, how does a conservatory-level musician slip through our system completely unnoticed? Demanded Board of Education member Patricia Green during an emergency meeting. This represents systematic failure to identify and support gifted students from disadvantaged backgrounds. The School district implemented new protocols requiring arts teachers to actively identify and assess student talents regardless of socioeconomic status. Additional funding was allocated for arts programs in schools serving low-income communities, with specific provisions for providing access to instruments and private instruction. Hope Haven Shelter received overwhelming attention and donations following the revelation that they had been housing an extraordinary musical prodigy. Sister Evelyn Brooks used the unexpected funding to expand services and hire a dedicated staff member to identify and nurture special talents among homeless youth. Aaliyah isn't unique in having gifts, Sister Evelyn explained to reporters. She's unique in having those gifts recognized and supported. How many other talented young people are we losing because homelessness makes their potential invisible? The classical music world experienced its own reckoning about accessibility and elitism. Maestro Rossi published an editorial criticizing how the industry's focus on prestigious conservatories and wealthy patrons created barriers that excluded talented musicians from disadvantaged backgrounds. We claim to value merit and talent, yet our institutions are designed to serve primarily those who can afford expensive training, Rossi wrote. Aaliyah's story exposes the uncomfortable truth that our industry systematically fails to identify and develop talent that doesn't arrive with financial resources already attached. His critique inspired the formation of a coalition of conductors, performers, and educators committed to creating accessible pathways into classical music for talented students, regardless of background. The Chicago Symphony Orchestra established a full scholarship program specifically for students experiencing homelessness or housing instability. Andre Baptiste used his celebrity platform to highlight the broader implications of Aaliyah's story, appearing on national television to discuss how poverty creates barriers to artistic development. Talent is distributed equally across all communities, Baptiste explained during a talk show interview. Opportunity is not. Aaliyah maintained conservatory-level skills while homeless because of extraordinary dedication and limited access to practice space. Imagine what she could achieve with the same resources wealthy students take for granted. Professor Chambers returned to Juilliard and successfully advocated for the creation of a full scholarship program for students from disadvantaged backgrounds, with comprehensive support services addressing not just tuition but housing, meals, instruments, and emotional counseling. We've been selecting from a limited pool of students who could afford our tuition and living expenses in New York City, Chambers told the Board of Trustees. Expanding access isn't charity. It's ensuring we're actually training the most talented musicians rather than just the wealthiest applicants. Most significantly, Aaliyah's story catalyzed a national conversation about how society identifies and nurtures talent in children facing poverty and instability. Philanthropist Benjamin Ashworth convened a summit of foundation leaders, educators, and youth advocates to develop systematic approaches to finding and supporting talented young people whose circumstances made their gifts invisible. The tragedy isn't just what almost happened to Aaliyah, Ashworth told the summit attendees. It's all the other talented young people whose gifts we're losing because we don't have systems designed to find and support them. The summit produced concrete recommendations: mandatory talent assessment programs in all public schools, emergency funding protocols for students whose circumstances threatened their educational continuity, and partnerships between arts institutions and social service agencies to identify and support talented homeless youth. Vanderbilt's political career never recovered from the incident. Despite attempts at redemption through charitable giving and public service announcements about supporting youth arts, voters couldn't forget the image of him mocking a homeless child whose talent far exceeded his compassion. He lost the election by 12 percentage points. A cautionary tale about how cruelty caught on camera could end political ambitions. For Aaliyah, the systematic changes meant she wasn't just receiving individual support. She was becoming a catalyst for reforms that would help countless other talented young people whose gifts had been hidden by poverty's shadows. 9 months after her viral performance on the Symphony Center plaza, Aaliyah stood backstage at Chicago's Orchestra Hall, preparing for her official debut as a featured soloist with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. Her transformation from homeless teenager to celebrated young artist had been remarkable. But perhaps more impressive was how she had maintained her essential character throughout the journey. The past months had brought changes that once seemed impossible. She now lived with the Morrison family, carefully vetted foster parents who understood her musical commitment and provided stable, supportive home environment. Dr. Janet Morrison was a music therapist, and her husband David taught music history at Northwestern University, making them uniquely qualified to support Aaliyah's development. "We're not trying to replace your grandmother," Janet had told Aaliyah during their first meeting. "We're trying to honor her legacy by providing the stability she would have wanted for you." Enrollment at the Chicago Academy of Music had challenged Aaliyah in ways that homelessness never had. Surrounded by talented students from wealthy families, she initially felt like an imposter whose viral fame had created opportunities she didn't truly deserve. Professor Diane Chambers, who traveled from Juilliard monthly to work with Aaliyah, addressed these insecurities directly. "Your talent isn't diminished by how you were discovered. You maintained conservatory-level skills while homeless, practicing mentally when you couldn't access a piano. That demonstrates dedication most of your classmates have never needed to develop. The private lessons with Andre Baptiste had been transformative, not just for technique, but for understanding her role as an emerging artist with a platform." Baptiste emphasized that her story carried responsibility beyond personal success. "You have the opportunity to change how people think about talent, poverty and worthiness," Baptiste explained during one of their sessions. "Use your voice to advocate for others who haven't been discovered yet." Aaliyah had taken that advice seriously, working with Sister Evelyn to establish the Hidden Talents Initiative at Hope Haven Shelter. The program provided arts assessment and support for homeless youth, identifying gifted young people and connecting them with appropriate resources before their circumstances destroyed their potential. "I was lucky that someone happened to be recording when I played," Aaliyah told reporters covering the initiative's launch. "But luck shouldn't determine which talented kids get opportunities. We need systems that actively look for gifts in communities where they're usually overlooked." Her relationship with Marcus Reed had evolved as both their circumstances improved. Marcus, inspired by Aaliyah's transformation, had enrolled in community college and was working toward becoming a social worker specializing in homeless youth services. "Jazz showed me that our current circumstances don't have to define our futures," Marcus explained during an interview about his own journey. "If she could maintain her gift while living in a shelter, I could work toward my own goals too." The most meaningful transformation had been in how Aaliyah understood her grandmother's legacy. The promise to keep playing no matter what had sustained her through homelessness. But now she recognized that Margaret Montgomery's true gift hadn't been just musical training. It had been teaching her that talent, combined with character, could transcend any obstacle. "My grandmother always said that music was about communicating emotion and truth," Aaliyah reflected during a pre-concert interview. "The technical skills matter, but what you communicate through those skills matters more." Tonight's performance would be her first major public appearance since the viral video, and the pressure was substantial. Critics would be evaluating whether her plaza performance had been a lucky moment or genuine indicator of her abilities. Classical music purists questioned whether someone with such unconventional training could maintain standards in a formal concert setting. Maestro Rossi, who would be conducting the orchestra, visited Aaliyah backstage before the performance. "Ignore the critics and the expectations," he advised gently. Play the music that's in your heart, the same way you did on the plaza. That authenticity is what moved people, not technical perfection. As Aaliyah walked onto the stage to thunderous applause from the sold-out audience, she noticed familiar faces in the front rows. Sister Evelyn beaming with pride, Mrs. Lynn Cooper from the music store dabbing at tears, Jerome J.J. Jackson, the homeless veteran who had first told her about Cooper's practice piano, wearing his best clothes and looking overcome with emotion. But the person whose presence meant most was seated in the box usually reserved for major donors. Penelope Vanderbilt had quietly funded a scholarship in Margaret Montgomery's name and had become a genuine advocate for youth arts access, separate from her husband's political damage control. The transformation Aaliyah had undergone wasn't just about her own circumstances improving. It was about learning to use her platform to create opportunities for others while honoring the values her grandmother had instilled during those years of patient instruction in their modest apartment. As she placed her hands on the Steinway's keys and prepared to play the same Rachmaninoff concerto that had changed her life, Aaliyah understood that she was performing not just for the audience before her, but for every talented young person still waiting to be discovered in shelters, in struggling schools, in circumstances that made their gifts invisible to those with power to help. 2 years after Congressman Vanderbilt's mockery had inadvertently launched Aaliyah Montgomery into the spotlight, Chicago's Symphony Center unveiled the Margaret Montgomery Memorial Music Education Center, a facility dedicated to identifying and nurturing musical talent in underserved communities throughout the region. 16-year-old Aaliyah stood at the dedication ceremony, no longer the frightened homeless girl who had played on the plaza, but a poised young artist whose transformation had inspired systematic changes in how the music world approached talent development and accessibility. My grandmother believed that music was a gift that should be shared, not hoarded, Aaliyah told the assembled crowd of musicians, educators, philanthropists, and community members. This center honors her belief by ensuring that talent is recognized and supported, regardless of a young person's circumstances. The facility housed practice rooms, instruments available for loan, private instruction studios, and most importantly, a staff dedicated to actively searching for musical gifts in communities where they were typically overlooked. In its first year of operation, the center had identified and begun supporting 127 talented young musicians who might otherwise have been lost to poverty, homelessness, or lack of access. Maestro Giovanni Rossi, now in his final season before retirement, reflected on how Aaliyah's story had transformed his understanding of the music world's responsibilities. I spent 50 years in classical music, believing that talent would naturally rise to the surface. Aaliyah taught me that talent can be buried under circumstances so difficult that even the most dedicated young artists struggled to maintain their gifts. His final act before retirement was establishing the Rossi Fellowship, providing full scholarship support for talented students from disadvantaged backgrounds to study at the world's finest conservatories. The program's first recipient was a 17-year-old violinist from rural Appalachia whose extraordinary talent had been discovered. Through the network of talent scouts inspired by Aaliyah's story, Professor Diane Chambers had successfully transformed Juilliard's admission and support systems, making the prestigious institution genuinely accessible to talented students, regardless of financial background. Her Accessible Excellence initiative had been adopted by conservatories worldwide, fundamentally changing who had opportunities to develop elite musical skills. Aaliyah proved that the most talented musicians aren't necessarily those who can afford prestigious training. Chambers explained during a conference on music education reform. They're the ones with the deepest dedication and the strongest connection to their art. Our job is to remove barriers rather than creating them through cost. André Baptiste's continued mentorship of Aaliyah had evolved into a broader commitment to supporting talented young musicians from underrepresented backgrounds. His annual Emerging Voices concert series featured young artists whose gifts might have been overlooked by traditional classical music. Gatekeepers. Working with Aaliyah reminded me that my success carries responsibility, Baptiste reflected. I have platforms and resources that can create opportunities for the next generation of artists who face the obstacles I never encountered. Benjamin Ashworth's foundation had expanded its mission from general education support to specifically focusing on talent, identification and development in communities where gifts were usually invisible. The Hidden Talents program operated in 40 cities nationwide, training social workers, teachers and shelter staff to recognize and support exceptional abilities in young people facing difficult circumstances. Sister Evelyn Brooks had become a national advocate for comprehensive support services that addressed not just basic needs, but also the preservation of talents and dreams that poverty threatened to destroy. Hope Haven Shelter had become a model for how homeless services could integrate talent development into their mission. We used to focus exclusively on immediate survival needs: food, shelter, safety, Sister Evelyn explained during congressional testimony on youth homelessness. Aaliyah taught us that supporting a young person's gifts and dreams is also essential to their survival and recovery. The most unexpected transformation had been in Richard Vanderbilt, whose political career had ended, but whose personal growth had been genuine. After losing the election, he had withdrawn from public life and spent 2 years volunteering at youth arts programs, working directly with young people from disadvantaged backgrounds. I can never undo the cruelty I showed Aaliyah, Vanderbilt admitted during a rare interview. But I can spend the rest of my life trying to support young people rather than dismissing them based on appearances. His wife Penelope had become one of the most effective advocates for arts accessibility, using her social connections and financial resources to support programs that made music education available to all children regardless of background. For Aaliyah herself, the journey from homeless teenager to celebrated young artist had taught lessons that transcended music. Now a junior at the Chicago Academy of Music with full scholarship, offers from multiple prestigious conservatories for college. She understood that her greatest achievement wasn't the accolades or opportunities. It was maintaining her grandmother's values while navigating sudden success. People sometimes tell me, I'm lucky that Congressman Vanderbilt mocked me in public, because it led to my discovery, Aaliyah reflected during the center's dedication. But I'm not grateful for his cruelty. I'm grateful for the people who saw past my circumstances to recognize my talent. I'm grateful for the systems we've built to ensure other talented young people don't need viral moments to be discovered. The scholarship offers she was considering included Juilliard, Curtis Institute and the New England Conservatory, institutions that once seemed impossibly beyond her reach. But regardless of where she chose to study, her commitment remained the same. Use her platform to advocate for talented young people whose gifts were hidden by poverty's shadows. As the dedication ceremony concluded, Aaliyah played one final piece on the center's main stage, the same Rachmaninoff concerto she had performed on the plaza 2 years earlier. But this time, she played it in a warm concert hall, surrounded by people who understood both her talent and her journey, performing not as a homeless girl, trying to prove her worth, but as an artist honoring her grandmother's legacy by ensuring that other talented young people would have the opportunities Margaret Montgomery had dreamed of for her granddaughter. The piano's final notes echoed through the hall, carrying with them the promise that talent would be recognized, gifts would be nurtured, and young artists would be valued for their abilities rather than dismissed for their circumstances. The homeless girl who had been mocked for daring to touch a public piano had become a symbol of how art could transcend poverty when communities chose to see potential rather than limitations. Aaliyah's story had ended one chapter and begun another, not just for her, but for countless talented young people whose gifts would now be recognized because one girl had the courage to play despite mockery, and because the world had finally learned to listen. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.